One of the things that we know about information technology as it's introduced into organizations is that organizations adapt to the technology, and then in turn the technology adapts to the organization. We learn more about the use of the technology, what it can do, what it can't do, and how it affects the business. And one of the early researchers in this area is a fellow named Richard Nolan, or Dick Nolan. And he came up with this notion of the stages of growth model that helps us understand the way information technology changes and the organization adapts to it. We often pair this with Linda Applegate's model that's used to help us understand break-even and the way IT is used to help organizations make money for a particular cost. So the break-even model of investment helps us evaluate the IT investment, and Nolan's model helps us understand the growth and the changes of that over time. We see here the Dick Nolan's model, the y-axis says that organizational learning, which helps us really focus on the fact that organizations learn about the use of technology. And the first stage is initiation. So we see this is where the organization is learning about the technology. It's just been put in. You're not sure what it can and it can't do. This is followed very quickly by contagion. So once we have the technology in the organization, we start learning about it, and we start finding other uses and other users for it. So at this point, we've learned about the technology. It's starting to spread through our company, and you'll notice the curve there that we're just about at an inflection point. The important part of the inflection point here is stage 3, and that's control. As the IT starts spreading through the company, it becomes pretty clear that we're going to have to control its growth, control its use. Otherwise, it becomes too expensive. And so we start trying to control what happens with the technology, who gets to use it, who doesn't get to use it, and how he can use it more effectively. So the first two stages have to do with growth and pushing the technology through the organization, whereas stage 3 is about controlling it, and stage 4 is about integrating it into the organization so it becomes part of the processes that we use to govern our companies. And we take a look at how technologies over time affect one another. So we have on the y-axis here, it's kind of the performance price ratio of a particular technology, and the x-axis shows time. And we'll take a look at the arrow that's labeled current product/service evolutionary trajectory. So if you think about Nolan's model and the way it looks there over time, where we've got that trajectory of that curve, just map that same curve over to the current product service trajectory, and you can see that over time its use grows and the price performance ratio grows because we're controlling it and standardizing its use. But we look at the arrow labeled disruptive trajectory, and that's a new entrant, a new kind of technology. The new technology comes along, and at time t1, we see that it's in the early phases of kind of initiation and contagion, but somewhere along the way we start managing it, and the new technology disrupts the current technology. In other words, things change. And we see this as we take Nolan's model and extend it over time, where we have a series of growth curves here depicted, and each time we have one technology either extending or replacing another. It's labeled here technological discontinuity. We can see we go through the same sorts of stages of integration, contagion, and control, but stage 4 changes a little bit. It's both integration and stage 1 of a new curve. Now we combine all these curves together and it creates one big kind of curve where we start looking at how the technology changes over time and the various phases it goes. So the stages down at the bottom on the x-axis show the increasing sophistication and maturity of the technology. And we have those transition points that we can see along the way as we go from one kind of technology to another. And down at the bottom now, we're no longer limited by the 4 phases of initiation, contagion, control, and integration. But we now have 2 other phases here, data management and maturity of the technology, that shows that over time the organization starts controlling it and making better use of the technology. We might pair this up with with other models of diffusion of innovation, which are covered in another discussion. Now, as I lay this model kind of on top of another, we take a look at Linda Applegate's model. Notice both in both the yellow and red lines that we start at a particular point on the curve, and we start measuring our investment. So as we invest in the IT, we're not making any money, and we can see that our investment is in fact negative. Our money going into the project is increasing, and it's costing us more and more as we invest in the technology. But at some point, and there it's labeled decreased investment, what we're noticing is that at some point we stop investing great sums of money in the technology, and we start noticing that we are gaining some of the rewards for the investment in there. So we see the thing labeled decreased time to cash flow positive. In other words, as we get to the bottom of the yellow curve, at that point we have an inflection point where we start making money from the use of the technology. And as in both of these curves, as they start rising to that dashed line where break even occurs, we see that an important part of the way we manage IT and IT return on investment is not through some complicated series of calculations about the return on investment, but we start focusing on simply the payback break-even point in this curve. So the point where both the red and the yellow pass break-even, that's where we start thinking about value being created in the organization. Now, what makes the red and the yellow curves different is that the red project breaks even sooner than the yellow project. So we had a more substantial investment in IT in the yellow project, and it took longer for it to break even, whereas the red project, we didn't have quite the investment. It didn't take as long to break even. We look at the other end, the tops of both curves, we see that both created value, but in this case the yellow curve creates more value than does the red curve. This isn't always the case. Sometimes the red curve is going to generate more value, and this is where we start looking at the competitive uses of information technology. This last slide talks about the kind of the important points along the way. And essentially we divide up these curves into 4 pieces. We've got the downward sloping part of both the red and yellow, both sloping down to the blue ovals, and those represent the investments. The trajectory of the value creation below break-even is important, and those represent some evaluation times as we start deciding how to invest and what not to do with our projects. As both of these cross the break-even point, that's the point where we start evaluating the value. And then, of course, as they both peak and start declining, those are the places where we start deciding that maybe it's time to decommission the software. So both of these models help us understand that the use of the technology over time changes, and its value over time changes as well.